If you are buying anything that's still packaged, that's not a whole food, but it's still plant-based, you really still need to pay attention to labels because people get very confused. Organic does not mean gluten-free, and often people think that it does. All natural does not mean gluten-free. Wheat-free does not mean gluten-free, and that's a huge misconception because gluten is wheat, barley, and rye that we have to really watch.
Welcome to the Plant-Based Eating Made Easy podcast. I'm your host, Anna Zinn, plant-based registered dietitian and transition coach. Hi, friend. Do you want to regain your health with plant-based eating but feel overwhelmed and lost about how to do it? Do you feel it'll be hard to change your meat-heavy diet and impossible with working, running the home, or chasing after the grandkids? If so, you're in the right place. Here you'll find simple strategies, clear nutrition guidance, and practical tips to help you thrive plant-powered with more energy. So if you're ready to ditch the guesswork and transform your health the stress-free way, cozy up now with a hot cup of tea or listen while you walk, and let me show you how doable plant-based eating can be. Let's do this. Hi, friend. Welcome to this episode. I'm excited today to welcome Jennifer Marcks to the Plant-Based Eating Made Easy podcast. Jennifer is a gluten-free health coach helping women create a sustainable and delicious gluten-free lifestyle that becomes routine in their everyday lives. As the creator of Gluten-Free Marks the Spot, Jennifer helps you fall in love with your gluten-free life. Along with a gluten-free growth membership with monthly support and accountability, Jennifer also has a free Facebook group community called Empowering Gluten-Free Women. Change your plate to change your life. So it's my pleasure to welcome Jennifer to join us here on this podcast. Hello, Jennifer. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, Anna. Thanks so much for having me on.
Great. Let's begin by having you tell us about your background and story. How did you get into gluten-free eating and coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I am now, as of today, I am gluten-free for 15 years, and it was a very long road to even get here. Gluten really derailed my health for years, giving me all kinds of symptoms and reactions that I could not figure out why I was having these reactions, and no doctor could figure that out either. I mean, 15 years ago when I started my gluten-free journey, people were not talking about gluten-free living like they do today. It was not part of your mainstream conversation, and the food was not so great back then either. But I had a myriad of different things happening, such as daily headaches and canker sores and neuropathy in my hands and feet, daily belly aches, so debilitating that I'd be bent over in pain, but yet still be told, oh, you're totally healthy. And I'd always say to the doctors, I think it's something I'm eating, but I really could not pinpoint what that was. Like I said, gluten was not in the conversation like it is today. So once I was told to go gluten-free and finally figured out, one doctor said, I do think it's what you're eating. And he sent me to dietitian and she said gluten and dairy for sure. And I did know that dairy had bothered me already, so that was a given. But gluten, I had no idea what that meant or what I needed to do. And I was told to eat quinoa and buy some gluten-free bread. That was my beginning to going gluten-free, which is not much. So I dove in, and as I was researching and really trying to understand and create a gluten-free lifestyle that was going to work for myself and my family, because at the time I had 2 children and now I have 3 children. But as I was researching and learning about living gluten-free and learning all about celiac disease, I found out that my 2 children had celiac disease. They had some issues going on that nobody was putting together. But when you take the whole puzzle and you put it together, it equaled celiac disease, and they were tested and they were off the charts for celiac disease. So I like to say that finding out that gluten had impacted my health was a blessing in disguise, because I don't know that even until today that we would have known that gluten was an issue for my children. So my 3rd child was pretty much born into it, and we had to feed him gluten when he was 18 months old, and that was a disaster. He turned into this very opposite baby that he had been, with sleeping well and eating well and pooping well. That all changed completely and totally the doctor's like, yes, get him off of gluten now. So 4 out of 5 of us are gluten-free at our household, and we learned so much. And you and I had talked about your journey in the past, and it was not an easy thing to start and do on our own, because 15 years ago, there was not much out there to help us. And I didn't want other people to struggle and have to put that into place on their own. So that kind of led me into teaching others what we had learned and to live a healthier gluten-free lifestyle and to show them that, yes, gluten-free can be easier and delicious.
Wow, what a journey for you and your family to figure all of this out. I'm so glad that after all those years, you were able to pinpoint and figure out that gluten was the main culprit causing your health issues. And for
Hmm.
your children, especially, what a difference it made in their lives to be gluten free. This definitely makes eating gluten free a necessity for survival for your family. So I can understand how that then grew your passion for helping others navigate this tricky path of starting and staying gluten free.
Yes, absolutely.
I think one of the most challenging aspects of maintaining a gluten free lifestyle, though, is keeping a diet that is 100% gluten free, which is crucial if you have celiac disease, right? And you need to keep your health in the best shape possible for total gut healing and restoration. I know some people feel like a little bit of gluten won't hurt, but
Mm.
I think unfortunately that's not true. Is that right?
That is not true. That is not true. If you have celiac disease, you need to be 100% gluten-free. And I even say, because I don't test for celiac disease, but my doctor noted me as textbook celiac. So, and if I have if I have any kind of cross-contamination, I am absolutely so incredibly sick. So it is, I say it is really imperative to do your absolute best to be 100% gluten-free. So there's a lot to put into place, which is what I teach my clients and my students to do.
Yes, so important then to stay 100% gluten free. I think the benefit is that when you're sticking to natural whole plant based foods like fruits and vegetables, beans, and nuts and seeds on a whole food plant based diet, you're less likely needing to worry about getting gluten accidentally in your meals since these foods are naturally gluten free. But I know there are still areas we need to be careful of when navigating the supermarket or buying those minimally processed or certain packaged plant based food items. So I would love to get your tips for our listeners to use on their next grocery shop. What do you think are some important areas to watch out for that gluten free eaters need to be aware of when buying plant based foods?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, if you are buying anything that's still packaged, that's not a whole food, but it's still plant-based, you really still need to pay attention to labels because people get very confused. Labels are confusing, first and foremost. Organic does not mean gluten-free, and often people think that it does. All natural does not mean gluten-free. Wheat-free does not mean gluten-free, and that's a huge misconception because gluten is wheat, barley, and rye that we have to really watch. So if a product is just wheat-free, it might still have rye or barley in it or another gluten grain that would cross-contaminate that product. So a wheat-free product would not be a safe gluten-free option. And non-GMO also does not equate to being gluten-free. Now, all of those labels, organic, all natural, wheat-free, non-GMO, they're all a great addition to buying a gluten-free product, but they do not equal gluten-free. So you still want to make sure that the product is certified gluten-free. I've had so many well-intentional friends who have cooked me a meal and said, here, it's all organic, it's safe for you. And, it breaks my heart to say, well, actually, organic does not mean gluten-free. So you do have to pay attention to that. Another area to look out for are oats. Oats are very controversial in the gluten-free field because oats are naturally gluten-free, yet how oats are grown and processed, there's lots of cross-contamination that can happen, therefore making oats not safe for celiac or if you're gluten intolerant. Because often farmers will grow a field of wheat and the next year they might grow oats on that same field, or they might grow side by side. So the winds will push the wheat into the oats. And then how they're processed, there's lots of cross-contamination happening in that as well. So we want to always purchase certified gluten-free oats. Bob's Red Mill and Thrive Market are two great brands that I trust, that we use, that are certified gluten-free. And oats generally also bother people's intestines. So if you are just starting your gluten-free diet, you might want to not have some oats right away. They're harder to digest, and they may be irritating to you as you're trying to improve your digestion by taking that gluten out. But that's just something to think about. And another thing to really watch out for are condiments. We love to add things to our foods and add more spice and add more flavor. And certain condiments will have lots of hidden gluten in them. So we really have to pay attention to reading labels like soy sauce. Soy sauce is always one that people are so shocked about. They're like, well, it's made from soy. But often soy sauce has wheat added to it. It's made with wheat. So we have to really pay attention. You can purchase tamari or a certified gluten-free soy sauce, or even use coconut liquid aminos as a soy sauce. Of course, that's a bit sweeter, so we want to watch that. But yeah, so those are some top tips. One other thing I would add, though, too, is we are a society that wants to make things easy and wants to make things quick. So when you're at the grocery store and you are in that vegetable aisle and you see all those pre-cut vegetables, packaged up for you, you don't have to cut the squash when you get home or the watermelon. Well, for those of us living gluten-free, one, if we don't know where that has been cut, you can have cross-contamination right there. So in that pre-cut package, if they cut that on a surface where they cut bread or bread was in the area, or they use the same knife as cutting bread or something that contained gluten, that could cross-contaminate that product for you. So it's just something to be aware of.
Those are great tips, Jennifer. Thank you so much. And I'm glad you touched on the issue of cross-contamination. I'm sure that is a big issue for someone who is on a gluten-free diet because there's so much potential for cross-contamination, not just in products, like you're saying, but also sometimes just the surfaces where foods have been packaged and cut for convenience. So that's a great suggestion in terms of staying away from some of those pre-cut vegetables and produce and buying the whole versions instead and cutting it yourself. What about things like pre-chopped frozen items, those broccoli florets or butternut squash that you have in the freezer section? What would you say to that?
For that, I would say that if you are just beginning your gluten-free journey, when you're purchasing things like the frozen vegetables, I would look for that gluten-free label, because that's going to tell you that that company has taken the steps to make sure that's a safe product for you. So look for gluten-free. Typically, we do okay if it's just broccoli chopped in the bag and nothing else. But at the beginning, number one, you want to look for the gluten-free certification on the bag. And number two, you want to purchase from companies that you trust. So as you learn more about the companies that you're purchasing food from, especially those frozen products, you're going to learn who has good practices in place and which companies don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
But back to your point about how wheat-free doesn't mean gluten-free, that's such an important point because it's true that product could still use other ingredients that contain gluten, like the rye or the barley. And plant-based foods, especially those vegan meat alternatives and other plant-based commercial products, could still contain wheat, definitely, like those cookies and pastries products, but also even the meat alternatives could contain wheat. I remember the other day at the store, I was looking at some meat alternative products, and there's a yeast veggie turkey slices. And I just looked at the ingredients, and the first three ingredients were water, wheat gluten, and tofu, and wheat starch, natural flavors. So just the gluten was in the second and fourth ingredient just there. So you really have to look at the labels, like you said, and the ingredients list on that product to make sure it doesn't contain gluten before you buy it. But for someone who just grabs that product and goes and thinks, oh, plant-based means it should be okay, that is not going to be helpful for someone who's on a gluten-free diet.
Exactly. Yes.
Great. So thank you for sharing these valuable tips. I'm sure this will be very helpful for someone, especially who is new to a plant-based diet and relatively new to being gluten-free. I know you have so much experience, 15 years of eating and staying gluten-free. So I want to pick your brain a little bit in terms of the baking realm. Do you have one or two tips when baking gluten-free treats and using gluten-free flours that would be helpful to know so we can minimize those baking flops and have more tasty successes?
Absolutely, yes. Gluten-free baking is a science in and of itself. Let me tell you that. I grew up baking with my mom and baking with my children before going gluten-free. So when I started baking gluten-free and making hockey pucks and things that crumbled in my hands, I thought, oh my gosh, how can I not bake anymore? Because I thought my baking days were over. And then I just dove in and started learning. But you grow up and you think, oh, we bake with wheat flour. There's one flour that we bake with, right? Maybe there is cake flour and wheat flour, and that's all you ever used. But when you start looking at the flours that are available when you're baking gluten-free, it's a bit overwhelming at the beginning because there are so many to choose from. There are brown rice, the different rice flours, different starches like tapioca starch or arrowroot starch or even cornstarch. Then we have cassava flour and coconut flour, almond flour. I mean, there are so many out there, but the biggest takeaway in gluten-free baking, and this was just absolutely my pet peeve, is that when you read a recipe that for gluten-free baking and it says 2 cups of gluten-free flour, and they have this beautiful picture of the cupcake or brownie or whatever they've just baked, and you make it at home with your gluten-free flour, your recipe is not going to be their recipe because every flour you use will give you a different result. So I find that it is best to mix a few flours. I love mixing organic brown rice flour and millet flour, sometimes adding in a little bit of tapioca starch to give it more body, but that can give you a really great cupcake or muffin. But experimenting, really getting in the kitchen and trying them out, because like I said, every flour is going to give you a different result. And if you don't want to buy the flours individually, they do sell many that are mixes. But again, with the mixes, they're all different flours in these mixes. And then some of the mixes have gums in them, like xanthan gum or guar gum, which are very irritating to the gut. So we have to be careful and mindful of that, but are needed in order to pull together your gluten-free baked good. If you're going to make a pancake without a gum or without a binder, you're going to end up with a crepe over a pancake. So learning those little tricks, and this is something I have a gluten-free baking for beginners course that I teach that I absolutely love, but it gives you all these tips and tricks. One other thing are eggs. Right now, the cost of eggs has just skyrocketed, right? And a lot of people in your audience probably don't eat eggs. So I had a client come to me and she said, well, I'm egg free, so I guess I'm not baking anymore. I said, no, that's not true. We have so many things we can try. Just like we're substituting out flour in your gluten-free baking, you can also have many substitutes for the eggs. So ground flaxseed works great to replace an egg. You would take 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed and add that to 3 tablespoons of water, mix it up and let it sit for about 5 minutes. And that comes together like in a gel. And once that forms that bit of gelatin, then you use that for 1 egg. And I've used that in many of my recipes for cakes or muffins, and the recipe comes out really great using that as a substitute for eggs. You can also use banana, a pureed banana, or pureed fruit. I've even bought jars of baby food that's, organic, like peaches or carrots and things like that to use as a puree in replace of an egg. And you can also use applesauce or even a nut butter to replace an egg in your recipes. So on my website, I have like a zucchini muffin and a pumpkin muffin. They work wonderfully using egg substitutes like the flaxseed method, and it works quite well. So the biggest trick is getting in the kitchen and trying, because your baking days are not over because you're gluten-free or because you're plant-based. You just need to try new alternatives, which is the fun part of being in the kitchen, right?
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. I think part of moving into plant-based eating and perhaps on your gluten-free journey is that it's a journey. So you will be learning, you'll be exploring. There may be some fails, that's okay, but the more you try, the more you're willing to try and to explore in the kitchen, you are going to learn what works, what doesn't work, what works with the gluten-free flour that you have, and your family and yourself, you'll be rewarded in the end by some delicious alternatives that you can still enjoy. So I absolutely agree with you on that, Jennifer. And I love that about the flax egg because use that a lot in my own baking as well. And
Mm,
also chia eggs too. You can make a chia
mm,
egg with 1 tablespoon of chia seeds with about 3 tablespoons of water or plant-based milk. And that can
mm-hmm.
work quite well too.
Awesome. That's great.
I love these baking tips, and it just shows that you really can't just assume there will be just one kind of a gluten-free flour that'll work for all recipes. You really have to kind of test it out and explore that. So, do you have an additional takeaway tip for how to enjoy a delicious gluten-free plant-powered diet?
Absolutely. And this is exactly what I do with my clients. We start where they are. And if they've eaten all processed foods or they're partly plant-based or they're moving in that direction, we just add on to the plate, right? What vegetable can you add at your meal each week, each day this week? Or what can you add in with a smoothie? Or for breakfast, add some greens onto your plate with your scrambled eggs or make an omelet with some spinach or kale, but just really expanding your plate. And I think that is, like you just said, it is a journey and it is something that we're learning. And I think 50 years in, we're still learning new things. We're still finding new products. We're still finding new vegetables, right? You go to the farmer's market. Well, what is that? Ask the farmer, what is this vegetable I've never seen before? How do you cook it? How do you use it? Expand your plate because that is going to expand your health as well. Because our microbiome in our intestines, we want to just keep feeding that all the good bacteria. And by adding in more plant-based foods and expanding that, trying something new each week, that is just really going to push you to a healthier mode as you move forward.
I love that tip. I think that makes it all seem more doable and achievable to be able to just take steps forward to build onto your plate and build your health and to expand it. So, thank you for these wonderful tips and advice. How can those listening today best connect with you if they would like to know more about what you do and what you can help with?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd love them to hop on over and join us on the Empowering Your Gluten-Free Growth podcast, where I share tips and strategies on creating a sustainable and delicious gluten-free lifestyle, just like you do here on your amazing podcast for plant-based eating. And we just have so much over there. I have some amazing guests that are sharing great tips and strategies as well. So just a lot to take in and to implement into your life. And if you hop over to my website at glutenfreemarksthespot.com, Marks is my last name, Marcks. So glutenfreemarksthespot.com. We have lots of amazing recipes and all kinds of great gluten-free information, as well as some resources that you can grab while you're there.
That's wonderful. And I will be sure to include the links to connect with Jennifer in the show notes for this episode. So I've enjoyed our conversation today, Jennifer, and the great insights and tips you've shared. I know these will definitely help many of those listening. So thank you, Jennifer, for taking the time to come onto this podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me, Anna. Great conversation.
Thank you so much for listening. If this podcast has inspired, encouraged, or helped you in some way to transform your health, I would love to hear about it. Please take 30 seconds to rate and leave a written review on Apple Podcasts to let me know. It will encourage me so much to hear how this podcast has positively impacted and made a difference in your journey towards wellness. And share about this podcast with a friend or loved one so we can all thrive in the best health. Remember, plant-based eating can be easy and doable. See you in the next episode, my friend.